Little black girl saw all ignore the deaf daughter of the millionaire, until she spoke in signs. Sophia Carter was used to being overlooked. At 23, she carried herself with quiet dignity, even when the world around her seemed determined to treat her as invisible. She lived in Dallas, splitting her time between college classes and a part-time job as a sign language interpreter. To most, it was just another side hustle. But to Sophia, it was a calling. She had grown up watching her younger brother Michael struggle to navigate a world that rarely slowed down to understand him. Born deaf, he had taught Sophia something few others ever understood. Silence can be louder than words, and isolation can cut deeper than any wound. Learning sign language had not been easy. She spent long nights practicing, studying videos, stumbling over gestures until her hands finally flowed with the rhythm of expression. By the time she turned 18, she was fluent, interpreting for Michael at school meetings, doctor visits, and even at church. She promised herself that no one in her family would ever feel excluded the way he often did. However, in the larger world, Sophia discovered that being an interpreter came with its own invisible cage. People wanted her skills, but not her presence. They needed her hands, not her voice. If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share a word of love in the comments. That truth pressed down on her one particular evening as she arrived at the Grand Meridian Hotel. The building rose like a palace in the heart of Dallas, its glass exterior glittering in the night sky. Inside, golden light spilled across marble floors and velvet drapes. It was a world of power and money, one Sophia had only glimpsed from a distance. That night, she wasn't there as a guest. She had been hired to interpret at a high-profile charity dinner, organized by the city's most influential families. Before the event began, the coordinator pulled her aside. Dressed in a sleek black suit and holding a clipboard, he didn't bother with pleasantries. "Just remember," he said in a low voice, "interpreters are expected to stay in the background. No mingling, no unnecessary interaction. These people don't like to be bothered by staff." Sophia nodded, her lips forming a polite smile, but inside, her chest tightened. She had heard those words before, though rarely stated so directly. "You don't belong here. Stay invisible." She walked into the ballroom with her head high, but resentment flickered quietly in her heart. The hall was alive with sound. Jazz music drifted from a corner stage, laughter rippled through clusters of elegantly dressed guests, and the air buzzed with the clinking of crystal glasses. Waiters moved like shadows, balancing trays of champagne. Everywhere Sophia looked, wealth was on display. Diamond necklaces, tailored tuxedos, gowns that shimmered under the chandeliers. She took her place near the side, where interpreters and staff were meant to stand. From there, she could watch without being seen. And that was when she noticed the girl. Near the edge of the ballroom, almost hidden in plain sight, stood a teenager no more than 16. She was slender, her dark hair pulled back neatly, her dress expensive but simple compared to the glittering outfits around her. She stood apart, silent, watching the crowd with an expression that was neither shy nor timid, but lonely. Sophia's trained eyes picked up on the subtle cues. The girl scanned the room but never responded to the bursts of laughter or the music. Her gaze was sharp yet detached. She wasn't ignoring the noise. She simply couldn't hear it. Sophia realized instantly who she was. Emily Lawson, the daughter of Richard Lawson, a millionaire investor who sat on boards, funded charities, and gave speeches about equality and opportunity. His name often appeared in the news, praised as a philanthropist and a self-made success story. Tonight, he was the host of the event. Yet his own daughter stood at the edge of the celebration, isolated, as though she were invisible to everyone in the room. Sophia's pulse quickened. She knew that look. She had seen it too many times in Michael's eyes when classmates excluded him or when adults spoke over him as if he weren't there. A familiar ache settled in her chest, the ache of watching someone forced into silence. But what struck Sophia most was not just Emily's isolation. It was the indifference of everyone else. Guests brushed past her without so much as a glance. Even Richard himself, the proud father and celebrated benefactor, seemed too busy laughing with donors and shaking hands to notice the teenager standing alone. Sophia's role was clear. She was here to interpret, not intervene. The rules echoed in her mind. Stay in the background. Don't bother the guests. Yet something inside her stirred. This wasn't just a girl at a dinner. This was a young woman silenced by the very man who claimed to give a voice to the unheard. She didn't know it yet, but her decision to step out of the shadows that night would ignite a chain of events powerful enough to unravel an empire. Sophia couldn't stay in the shadows forever. Her eyes returned again and again to Emily, the millionaire's daughter, standing so still she almost seemed carved into the marble floor. Every time a guest laughed or the orchestra swelled, the contrast sharpened. Here was a girl locked out of her own father's celebration. Sophia's instincts overpowered the warning she had received earlier. She crossed the ballroom slowly, weaving between clusters of donors. At first, Emily didn't notice her. But when Sophia raised her hands and signed a simple hello, the teenager's expression changed completely. Emily's face lit up with a joy so sudden, it was as though someone had switched on a light inside her. Within moments, the two were deep in conversation. Emily told her about school, about her love for painting, about the loneliness of living in a house where no one spoke her language. She admitted something even more painful. Her father, Richard Lawson, the man who gave rousing speeches about equality, had never bothered to learn sign language. At home, he communicated through staff or with scribbled notes, treating his daughter less like family and more like a prop for his public image. Sophia listened, her heart twisting. She knew hypocrisy when she saw it, but hearing it from Emily's own hands carried a weight she couldn't shake. The girl wasn't exaggerating. The emptiness in her eyes told the truth. The evening reached its peak when Richard Lawson himself took the stage. He wore confidence like a custom suit, smiling at the crowd, thanking donors, and speaking of his commitment to giving a voice to the unheard. Applause rolled across the ballroom. Cameras flashed. The polished billionaire image gleamed brighter than the chandeliers. But Sophia couldn't stay silent. Her chest burned with anger. She thought of Michael, of the countless times she had fought to make sure he was heard. She thought of Emily, sitting quietly, clapping politely, while her father paraded as a hero. So she stood. In front of the city's wealthiest families, she raised her voice. Calm, steady, but unflinching, she challenged him. She told the room that Richard Lawson was no champion of the unheard, not when his own daughter remained ignored in his shadow. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Richard's smile faltered for the first time that evening. He tried to dismiss her as just an interpreter, but Sophia's words kept cutting. She revealed her own story. Her brother Michael, deaf since birth, and her years of learning ASL to ensure he would never feel abandoned. The room grew heavy, whispers spreading from table to table. Guests shifted uncomfortably. Some looked at Emily, suddenly realizing how often they had overlooked her that night. Richard laughed it off the way powerful men often do when challenged. But Sophia didn't stop there. She issued a wager. For the next 3 months, she would tutor him in sign language. If, at the end of that time, he could hold a 30-minute conversation with Emily in front of an audience, she would interpret for his company free for an entire year. But if he failed, he would donate $2 million to programs for deaf children and publicly admit his neglect. The crowd leaned in. The stakes were enormous. Trapped by pride and by the eyes of everyone who mattered to his reputation, Richard Lawson agreed. What no one in that glittering ballroom knew was that Sophia wasn't acting on impulse alone. Behind the scenes, she had allies. Her friend Daniel Reyes, a civil rights lawyer, had long suspected Richard's empire wasn't as clean as it appeared. Together, they began digging. What they found was staggering. Hidden settlements from employees who had faced discrimination. Funds meant for community programs were siphoned into private accounts. Records of Lawson using his influence to block opportunities for disabled students, ensuring that his businesses kept cheap, compliant labor. The deeper Sophia and Daniel searched, the darker the truth became. And when Michael shared his own experiences of how doors had been slammed shut on students like him because of Lawson's grip on local education boards, the injustice felt personal. This wasn't just about Emily anymore. It was about a system of silencing that stretched far beyond the walls of one ballroom. Meanwhile, the so-called tutoring sessions began. Richard treated them as an obligation, not a chance for change. He memorized phrases mechanically, only for appearances. He barked orders at Sophia as though she were an employee beneath him, not a teacher guiding him. Every week, Emily watched from a distance, hope slowly draining from her face. Sophia carried on, though frustration gnawed at her. She documented every session, every failure, every careless dismissal. She wasn't just teaching him signs. She was building a case. The tension built as the 3-month deadline approached. Guests who had witnessed the wager began whispering about it at other galas and dinners. Reporters caught wind of the story. Could the city's beloved philanthropist truly communicate with his daughter? Or would the truth finally come crashing down? Emily felt the pressure too. She confided in Sophia, sharing how much she wanted to believe her father cared enough to change. But his detachment told another story. Sophia promised her that no matter what happened, she wouldn't be invisible anymore. Every passing week, the stakes grew higher. Every new file Daniel uncovered added weight to the looming confrontation. And with each hollow smile from Richard, Sophia felt the line between exposure and danger closing in. By the time the public demonstration drew near, the city buzzed with anticipation. The Grand Meridian was booked again, the media invited, the stage set for what everyone expected to be a triumph. Richard Lawson, the philanthropist, the hero of the unheard, would prove his devotion by speaking to his daughter in her own language. But Sophia knew better. She had seen the cracks. She had seen his arrogance. And she had gathered enough evidence to know that when the curtain fell, it wouldn't just be his fatherhood exposed. It would be everything. The night of the reckoning arrived. The Grand Meridian glittered again, its chandeliers burning brighter than ever, as if trying to hide the shadows gathering in the corners. Cameras lined the walls, reporters whispered into microphones, and donors filled the seats with hushed anticipation. This wasn't just another charity event. Tonight, the city's most celebrated philanthropist was expected to prove his devotion not with polished words, but with his hands, with the language of his daughter. Sophia stood near the stage, her pulse racing. She had spent 3 months enduring Richard Lawson's arrogance, documenting every hollow effort, every moment of dismissal. She had watched Emily's hope shrink with each failed lesson. And now, as the room buzzed with excitement, Sophia felt the weight of everything pressing down. Tonight was not only a test for Richard, it was a test of truth. Richard entered to applause, smiling broadly, his tuxedo immaculate, his posture radiating confidence. Emily followed quietly, her expression a fragile mask. To the crowd, it looked like a father and daughter about to share a tender moment. But Sophia could see the tension in Emily's shoulders, the nervous flicker of her hands clasped in front of her dress. The moderator announced the challenge, reminding the audience of the wager made months earlier. Cameras flashed. All eyes turned to Richard. He began with rehearsed greetings, his hands stiff, mechanical, moving like a man mimicking gestures rather than speaking a living language. The audience clapped politely, charmed by the effort. For a few moments, it seemed he might actually fool them. Then Emily asked him something simple but profoundly human. She signed, "Do you remember my childhood drawings?" Richard froze. The crowd leaned forward. He looked to Sophia for help, his smile faltering. Sophia shook her head gently. This was between father and daughter. Emily repeated her question, slower this time, her eyes pleading. Richard stammered with his hands, fumbling the signs, twisting them out of order. His confusion spread like wildfire. Emily pressed again, her movements sharper. "Do you remember me? The real me?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Richard lowered his hands, his face tight with frustration. Murmurs rose from the audience. Some guests glanced at Emily with sympathy, others at Richard with unease. Cameras captured every second, every bead of sweat on the millionaire's forehead. Sophia's chest ached as Emily's composure cracked. For 16 years, she had been a silent shadow in her father's world, waiting for this moment of recognition. And now, under the lights, in front of the city, he had nothing for her. No words, no signs, no understanding. Finally, Richard spoke aloud, breaking the silence. "I don't understand." The words echoed through the ballroom like a confession. The room fell still, the mask shattered. The man who built an empire on polished speeches about inclusion had failed the one person who needed him most. Sophia stepped forward. Her voice was steady, but the fire in it burned through the air. She declared that Richard Lawson's failure wasn't an accident. It was a reflection of who he truly was. And that truth went deeper than neglect. At her signal, Daniel Reyes stood from the audience, carrying a folder thick with documents. Cameras swung toward him as he revealed what they had uncovered. Confidential settlements of discrimination lawsuits, records of funds stolen from charity programs, testimonies from employees silenced by fear. Names, dates, signatures, all tied to Richard Lawson. Gasps filled the room. The donors who had once cheered him now whispered furiously, some pulling out phones, others turning pale. Reporters scribbled notes, cameras flashing like lightning. Richard's composure cracked further. He slammed a fist against the podium, shouting that it was all lies, desperate to drown out the evidence. But the more he raged, the more the room pulled away. His empire was unraveling in real time, thread by thread. And in the middle of it all, Emily stood trembling, her eyes locked on her father. Sophia signed slowly to her, "You are not invisible. You never were." Tears welled in Emily's eyes, but for the first time, she lifted her chin in defiance. The tension in the ballroom thickened to the point of breaking. Guests rose from their seats, voices overlapping in outrage. Reporters rushed forward with questions. Security hovered uncertainly. Richard's voice, once commanding, was drowned out by the chaos. Sophia knew there was no turning back. This was no longer just about a father failing his daughter. It was about a powerful man finally stripped of his illusions. And yet, even as Richard Lawson's world collapsed in front of flashing cameras and shocked faces, a single question hung in the air, unspoken but piercing every heart in the room. If this is how he treated his own daughter, how many others had been silenced in the shadows of his empire? The aftermath was swift and merciless. Within weeks, Richard Lawson's empire crumbled. Contracts evaporated, donors pulled away, and lawsuits that had once been buried resurfaced with new force. Investigators pored over the documents Daniel Reyes had revealed, exposing a web of corruption that reached far beyond the charity stage. The man who once embodied success and generosity became a symbol of hypocrisy. His polished speeches were replayed on news networks, but now they sounded hollow, mocking even against the backdrop of his public downfall. For Emily, the collapse was both painful and liberating. She had grown up in silence, trapped in the shadow of her father's reputation, carrying the weight of being both his daughter and his forgotten child. Now the silence had been broken. It was not easy. Reporters sought her out, strangers whispered about her, and the world suddenly expected her to speak for years of neglect she had endured. But with Sophia by her side, Emily began to see herself not as a victim, but as someone who could finally step into her own light. She applied to an arts program in New York, a dream she had long kept hidden. Her paintings, raw and filled with emotion, told stories of isolation and longing, but also of resilience and hope. Galleries took notice. Her work began to travel far beyond what she could have imagined. In every stroke of paint, she reclaimed the voice that had been denied her. Sophia, too, found her life transformed. She was no longer just the quiet interpreter on the sidelines. Alongside her brother Michael and Daniel Reyes, she founded the Horizon Project in Dallas. Unlike the shallow charities she had witnessed, this space was built with honesty and care. It was not a photo opportunity for the wealthy. It was a community center where deaf and disabled youth could gather, learn, and be truly seen. Children who had once been dismissed as burdens found mentors. Parents discovered resources they had never been offered before. Michael, once a boy shut out by school systems, now stood in front of classrooms teaching sign language to hearing students, bridging the gap Sophia had once crossed for him. And Emily, though pursuing her art, joined the center's board. She made a promise to herself that no child would ever stand in a crowded room feeling as invisible as she once had. The impact rippled outward. People who had once whispered about Richard's downfall began to talk about something larger: the cost of silence, the weight of being overlooked because of race, disability, or class. The story forced the city to confront uncomfortable truths: that racism and ableism are not always shouted from podiums but often hidden in quiet neglect, in the failure to see, to listen, to acknowledge. Sophia knew that one confrontation could not erase centuries of injustice. But she also knew that every act of defiance, every moment of choosing to step forward instead of remaining invisible, mattered. Her challenge to Richard Lawson had begun as a defense of one girl in a ballroom. It ended as a reminder to thousands that justice is not just about tearing down the powerful. It is about building a future where the unheard are finally given space to speak. And so, the story lingers. In the quiet of the Horizon Project, in the brushstrokes of Emily's paintings, in the steady hands of Michael teaching his students, the echoes of that night at the Grand Meridian live on. A father's empire may have collapsed, but something far greater rose in its place. The undeniable truth that silence can no longer be the foundation of power. So the question remains: how many others still stand at the edge of rooms, unseen and unheard, waiting for someone to notice? And more importantly, when you see them, will you stay in the background, or will you step forward? What do you think about Sophia's courage and Emily's journey from silence to strength? Did Richard Lawson deserve the downfall that followed, or do you believe he could have truly changed? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective on this story. And if you want to hear more powerful stories like this, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps bring these voices and stories to light for even more people to see.